Thank you, Amy. Well, next on our list is Jonathan Rylander, a former undergraduate student. He received his BSME degree in 2005. Dr. Rylander is one of the fabled Rylander family, as many of you know. And he received his master's and PhD degrees from Stanford, working in kinematics and kinetics. He works as a postdoctoral fellow with the Brooke Army Medical Center, researching ways to improve walking performance and to decrease falls and injuries associated with lower extremity amputations, addressing this high military priority. Jonathan is a grandson of Betty and Grady Rylander, and all of you know Grady Rylander was a former chair of ME. He's a brother to Chris and Nathan Rylander, also ME grads, and cousin to Andrew Weldon, also an ME grad and a current graduate student. Come on up, Jonathan.
So just as a little forewarning, I was one of those Love Fest guys when I did my exit interviews, so so I might continue a little bit of that here, but no, it wasn't just a love fest in there, but also within our family. I mean, we absolutely love the Schmidt family and really appreciate just, the compassion y'all have shown us and stuff. But like many others in this room, we had the picture in the back. I was honored to take one of Phil's classes. He taught me thermodynamics, and Phil brought a whole lot of different approaches to teaching, which was something to me that was really inspirational because I've always wanted to be a teacher. And so he brought, the traditional PowerPoint, chalkboard, etc., but he'd also bring some historical facts to sort of make the engineering relevant, interesting. He'd don a costume every once in a while, and he'd also take us out field trip. I remember going to see probably my first hybrid car ever, and just Phil's eyes just light up, like a kid just saw, the ice cream truck go by. And he pops the hood up, and he explains everything, and it just, that enthusiasm rubs off on you. And I can even remember going home enthused about this and, typing in hybrid vehicles and learning a little bit more about it. And that's the kind of inspiration you get from Phil. It's infectious. But we also took a field trip out to 3M. I remember getting to see the big turbine there and everything. And then he made that into a project, which was really cool because you actually saw what you were trying to analyze. So I benefited a lot from Phil teaching me that one class, but I also benefited from the vast array of classes that he had his fingerprint on. All those Pro-Seed courses, all the hands-on experiments, all that stuff really helped prepare me for grad school when I actually had to develop an experiment, look at the data, try to make sense of it, which is different than a problem set. So I think that really helped prepare me quite a bit. But Phil is an amazing teacher. He'll be teaching forever. I'm convinced of that. But the story I wanted to share really comes outside of the classroom. My senior year, I was in charge of the Tau Beta Pi, the activity stuff. And one of the things I really like to do are the fireside chats. And it's where we could grab a professor, could get a small group of students and really engage more one-on-one. And so Dr. Schmidt, of course, volunteered his time and agreed to meet us in the afternoon. And so we go out and we're talking with Dr. Schmidt, and the question came up of how you got started in all this stuff. How about thermodynamics? And we was talking for a while, and one of the things he said just made all of our jaws just kind of hit the table. And we're like, what? We kind of look at each other. Did he really just say that? He had shared with us that he had actually struggled to pass thermodynamics once upon a time. He had had trouble with that class, and that it was kind of the tricky course for him, etc. And here, as students, we're looking at this world's expert. He's got a, list of all these accomplishments a mile long, well-deserved. And we couldn't believe that. So that was part one. But the other part we couldn't really believe was just the transparency of this faculty member. I mean, in academia, some of your currency is kind of the way you're perceived and sort of, what you have out there. And the fact that you'd be that honest and that open was just amazing. So that was one of those it took you from being a role model here and just sort of elevated to that next level. So that compassion was really inspirational. And then I saw that same compassion come out. Actually, the year I took his course, it was a group of students. We did this long project throughout. And you get really close with your teammates because you spend a lot of hours in that computer room, etc. And one of the guys that came close to, he lost his dad overseas. And of course he went and talked to Dr. Schmidt. And just the way you handled that, the way you orchestrated, you gave us a lot of grace and kind of worked things out. And just that was amazing. And you showed that same compassion when I lost my granddad too. And I just greatly appreciate that. So Great role model for myself. I was one of those hundreds of thousands of letters that you helped write, and inspired me to, help me choose where to go to grad school and talk through all that. So, but Phil's an amazing man, as everyone knows, and he'll draw you into his office. He'll give you those opportunities, but he also asks how you're doing, how your family's doing, and that's not something you always see people take the time to do in the academic world. And so that was quite inspirational. So here's your retirement. I hope you have time to do the 100,000 projects you've lined up for you and your grandkids to do. He would always tell us about the projects he had, and he'd pull out the pipes, we're going to shoot off rockets, and we're going to do this, and we're going to look at astronomy, and there's this great science program downtown. So I hope you have time to do all that stuff now. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Yuval Doron, who's a former ME undergraduate student, BSME 2008. Mr. Doron is a 2008 graduate of the ME undergraduate program and served in the US Navy from 1991 to 1996. And he obtained his BSME in 2008, his MSME from Texas A&M in 2009. We'll forgive him that, I suppose. He worked as a research assistant and lecturer in Texas A&M from 2009 to 2011, and he is currently the president and co-founder of Exocent Engineering, which he and his partner, Dr. Andrew Duggleby, whose MSME 2004, formed in 2010. Is Mr. Doron here? Are they?
Well, I don't have too many stories. I'm not one of those typical students that Dr. Schmidt, I think, ever, of all of his thousands of students, had to endure. I don't think he was ready for me. Because I came out of the Navy and I was a propulsion engineer in the Navy, I thought I know everything. Moreover, I was born in Israel, and Israelis know everything, period. When I had the first course, which was, of course, thermodynamics, Dr. Schmidt would draw these diagrams on a board, and a turbine and whatnot, and a compressor, and I would always correct him that he's drawing them backwards. And he would look at me with, because he knew that I knew which way to draw him. I didn't know anything else, but I knew so he would look at me, did I draw it right? And of course, when it came time to do homework, like everybody mentioned before, it was impossible to do. And I remember going to his office probably 10 to 12 times a day. I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't just for a problem, it was the 4 problems of a problem. I finished part A, went downstairs, went back up, part B. I don't know where his patience came from. I don't understand it. And of course, trying to lecture a smart aleck like me. I think close to the end of the semester, I managed to piss him off. I really think. I think at one point he said, you can go down this and do this on your own. And I felt he was angry. He was pissed. So I remember the next day I was downstairs, trying to do some work with a couple of my friends. And Dr. Schmidt comes in, and he walks in and he sees me sitting down, and he comes right over me. He puts his hand on the table and says, you need to come upstairs and talk to me right now. I was scared, you know what. I thought this guy is about to tell me that I'm out of the department, that I'm out of, I didn't know anything. I was scared. I went upstairs, I sat down, trembling. I was like, this guy's about to tell me that I'm out of here. He says, how about you working for me? The day before, I pissed him off. He sent me out of his office. How would you want to work for me? And this came out of the Proceed program, which Dr. Bogart mentioned. And I actually was the one that ended up rebuilding a big part of the fluids department. And those experiments are still running today. And I remember one of the experiments Dr. Schmidt had me do was design this pipe flow visualization. And he said, this is what we had, it doesn't work, your job is to get it to work. And for 3 weeks, I built this thing, and Dr. Schmidt comes down one day to the lab and sees what I built, and I said, look, I built this table. He says, show me your design plans. I said, what design? I am Yuval Doron, I don't need design plans. He said, great, now take this thing apart, draw it out, design it, and then bring it to me and you can rebuild it. And how did that guy earlier said? I thought he was an idiot? That's what I felt. How dare he? But you don't say no to Dr. Schmidt. So I did. I took it apart. I drew it up on paper, and like a schmuck, went back upstairs and said, this is it. And he said, good, now go build it. And I did. And when I got it to work, this was, I think, and Donna should remember this because Donna answered the phone call. I think it was Sunday night at 10:30 at night. And I got it to work. And there was a challenge. And I called. I had his home number. And I called at Sunday night at 10:30, and Donna answered. And she says, who is this calling at 10:30? I said, this is Yuvi speaking. Oh. And she hands me the phone. She hands over the phone, Dr. Schmidt. She says, it's Yuvi. He says, yes. I said, come to the lab, it's working. He said, tomorrow morning. I was so excited, but it was working. So that's one of the stories. So we developed this relationship. It was just a mentor, you can, there's no words. I mean, there's no words. On my third year, second or third year, I had a materials course, and I got a 50 on the first test. In fact, I got 50 on most of my tests. But after this test, I felt enough is enough, and I felt this engineering nonsense is ridiculous, what a waste of effort, and I'm out of this program. I felt so beaten. And I had prepared an entire speech to go tell Dr. Schmidt how I am quitting. And I rehearsed the entire conversation with him, and I just couldn't bring myself to tell him I'm quitting the program. I couldn't. So without him, unbeknownst to him, without even him talking to me, he convinced me to stay in the program. And I did. I don't know if you know, but in my family, you are a semi-god, which is against our religion, but you are idealized. We think tremendous of you, of everything you've done for us, and it's a life-changing, a person that changes your life to the better. In Hebrew we say tikkun olam, which is to fix the world. It's our job, and Dr. Schmidt is the pinnacle of that. He's the apex of that. So from the bottom of my heart, and this is one-time event, but you know that you are on these people's minds, after you die, that they'll think about you. My kids know you as Dr. Schmidt. I mean, my kids. So you will be forever remembered, sir. So best of luck.
Our next speaker is Cathy Foerster. She is a former undergraduate student and obtained her BSME in 1977. She obtained her degree with highest honors from our university and has worked with a number of companies, particularly in the oil and gas industry, including Exxon, Arco, BP, and others. And in 2005, the governor of Alaska appointed her to serve as the engineering commissioner for the Alaska Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. Ms. Foerster was named a 2005-2006 Emmy to the 2005-2006 Emmy Academy of Distinguished Engineering Alumni, and so she was named a Distinguished Mechanical Engineer. Come on up, Cathy.
Phil is patient, so just wait a minute. Before I start saying good things about you, first I want to say, Donna, I love you. And if anybody doesn't know Donna, you should. You'll love her. Next, I wanted to say how pleased I was to see Dr. Oberkamp, Dr. Panton, and Dr. Lesso and Dr. Vliet, all who were there when I was a student, and all but Dr. Vliet got to make it hard for me to graduate. And I understand Dr. Lamb is here too, and he was also a special friend. And Dr. Gloina was the dean when I was there, so it's really nice to be in the same room with all of you guys after years. And if you're a former student that's in the room, if you graduated around the time I was there and we didn't get to talk, I was Cathy Paciotti back then, find me. And for all the rest of you, you're really special if Phil has chosen to invite you to this, because he's special. And if you're his family and his friends, you're special by proxy. So I'm really tickled to death to have gotten a chance to meet many of you. All right, Phil, now it's on to you. I've been a friend and a fan of Phil's since 1973, and I've got a lot of stories, so get another glass of wine, get comfortable. This is going to take a while. I met Phil when I was a wide-eyed 18-year-old high school graduate up for orientation. And I went to my advisor, and I asked him a question about a class, and apparently the question I asked, or maybe just him in general, he was in a bad mood or whatever, but he made a really snarky comment about if I didn't think I could make it as an engineer, he could show me the way to the education building. And so I gathered up all my papers and looked him straight in the eye and said, "You're fired as my advisor." And I got up and left his office. And then I got out onto the street and I went, "Oh, no." I probably said something other than no, but oh no, now what do I do? Because when you're there for freshman orientation, your advisor is the one that gets you registered for your classes, and I fired my advisor. So I went over to the mechanical engineering building. It was then in the Taylor Hall, and I walked up and down the first floor, looking in the doors, looking for a professor. Nobody was there. It's summertime. I go up to the second floor, do the same thing. I get up to the third floor, and Phil is in his office. And so I knock on his door and ask if I can come in, and he says, sure. And he says, "How can I help you?" And I say, "Well, I just fired my advisor, and I need one." And, he goes, "Well, are you a mechanical engineering student?" And I said, "Well, I'm an incoming freshman studying mechanical engineering." And he goes, "Well, I typically advise graduate students." And I'm just going, "Boosh." And he goes, "But this sounds fun. Come on in." You can hear him saying that. I know you can. Yeah. So he helped me get registered for my first semester of school. And then he said, "But I'm going to find you someone who's good at advising undergraduates, because that's not really what I do. But Phil is responsible for getting me enrolled at the University of Texas." And then I ran into Phil again 2 years later when I was a sophomore and taking thermodynamics. It's an essential subject. It's not an easy subject, but it's the backbone of mechanical engineering. And if you're going to have to take thermodynamics, you want Phil as your teacher. So, I don't know what UT is going to do without you. And I feel sorry for the kids who have to take that class without you. But I was one of the lucky ones. But Phil was so intuitive, and he really cared so much about his kiddos that I didn't mention that my parents didn't have a lot of money, and I was counting on scholarships and jobs and stuff. Well, Phil came to me at the end of the class, at the end of the semester, and asked me if I wanted to grade papers for him. And I said, "Sure. Do I get paid?" And he said, "Yes." And I went, "Yes, I'm in." And if you've ever graded papers, not only do you get a little bit of pay, which to a college student, a little bit is a lot, but you also learn your subject better. And again, thermo is an essential subject. And so it was really good that Phil gave me the opportunity to learn his subject really well. Back when I was there, the fireside chats were held at the professors' homes. And not very many professors would sign up for those fireside chats. But Phil and Donna opened their home to students regularly. And I remember the very first fireside chat I went to was at Phil and Donna's house. And Donna has not changed much, but fortunately, Danny is no longer in diapers. And probably won't be again for many years. And throughout the rest of my years at UT, Phil was just always there as a mentor, and he tells stories about me that I'm not going to tell, but you can ask him. And he was always there bragging about me to anybody who'd listen. And if you were there at his family dinner last night, you fell asleep listening to it, and yeah, right. But he was a fan of me when there weren't many gals in engineering. In fact, if I went into the classroom and there was another girl in the room, I went, uh-oh, I'm in the wrong room, and had to go someplace else. So he believed in me even when most people were saying, what are these stupid girls doing here? They'll figure it out and go away. But he's just one of those great guys that sees more potential in people than they see in themselves. And then when I was a senior, for my senior design project, he was my advisor. And this, you've heard other stories tonight about people saying that he says, oh, come do this. Oh, you don't think you're qualified? That's okay, you can get through it. Well, the crux of our senior design project was heat transfer. And because of a number of things that don't matter, I hadn't taken heat transfer yet. And I was taking it concurrently with doing my senior design. And I said, Dr. Schmidt, I'm not prepared. Oh, yeah, you are. You'll be just fine. So, yeah, it ended up working out really, really well. But talking about him bragging, I forgot one of the things I wanted to say about him bragging about me. I had Dr. Panton for fluid mechanics. Dr. Panton's out here in the audience. And after our first little quiz, and it didn't count as much of our grade, but after our first quiz, I was standing out in the hall and I was talking to a bunch of other guys, mechanical engineers, and Dr. Panton comes up and interrupts the conversation, and he goes, Miss Paciotti, I've been told that you're going to be one of my best students, but you're going to have to do a lot better on the future tests. and I think I know who to blame for that. But I did okay. I ended up getting through his class without too much trouble after that. So after I graduated, Phil and I have kept in touch. When I would come back to campus to do college recruiting for ARCO, I would always call Phil and tell him I was going to be there. Could I maybe see him? Did he have any good students he could send my way? And of course, he always did. He and Donna made a trip to Alaska and let my husband and me share part of that trip with us. He even let me come down and lecture his thermodynamics classes one year. And I have to tell you about that. This is another Phil story that you're all going to go, yeah, I know what you're talking about. During my conversation with the kids, I went off on one of these little side stories, and it involved an individual. And I started to say something about this individual that was a little bit judgmental, maybe a little bit unkind. And I looked over at Phil, and he was going... And I was like, oh, because Phil never says anything about people unless it is the very best thing that he can think of to say. And if even that's not good, then he's not going to say anything. So Phil was still teaching me years and years later, like, you live up to my standard, you be a good girl. And I don't know whether he remembers that, but that stayed with me. And every time I start to say something unkind about someone, no matter how mad I get him, I remember Phil shaking his head and thinking, I cannot disappoint Phil. And that same trip to Austin, he worked a deal with Dr. Vliet and got me 45-yard line tickets for the Texas Tech game, the year that Texas won the national championship. So I owe him for that, too. Phil's reputation comes up to Alaska every year. There's a group of bikers that bicycle to Alaska every year. They're Texas students, and they bicycle, not motorcycle, all the way from Austin to Anchorage, raising money for cancer research. And in every group, there are at least 2 or 3 mechanical engineering students. And when I'm meeting them at the finish line and getting to know them all, and they tell me they're a mechanical engineer, I ask them if they know Phil, and they all say, oh, I love Dr. Schmidt. And the only ones who don't say that are the ones who say, I was so angry I didn't get into his class. So his reputation makes it all the way up to Alaska. Phil is a good man. He's humble and he's kind. He's a good friend, and he only speaks kindly and fondly of each and every one of you. He's a good father and a good grandfather, although he is a bit of a bragger. But that's okay. I learned patience from him. He is a great husband. He loves you, Donna, and he is devoted to you, and it just shows. And I know it's reciprocated, and I love that about you both. I feel blessed to be in a very special relationship with Phil. We've had a friendship for over 40 years, and few people have that kind of a relationship with a former professor. You guys that are former students, you're here for that same reason. I hope you're just kind of wallowing in it, rubbing it all over yourself and feeling good, because it is fabulous to be in a relationship like that with someone who's special, and someone who's as special as Phil. I love you.